Hey guys, this is Eckhart Slaughter. Hello and welcome to another Bad Batch review and breakdown. As always, this video will be full of spoilers for not only the most recent episode of the Bad Batch, but everything that's come before now. As a note, like we've been doing with prior episodes, we're going to sort of break this video in half, well, sort of three parts. I'll give a very brief summary of what happened in this episode, I'll talk about my main point, and then at the very end, I will also just give my general impressions if you want to skip around. I've included timestamps in the description. So this episode of the Bad Batch was episode 8 of season 1. It was called Reunion, and it was a follow-up of what happened last time. And of course, that's usually the case, but this really was a two-parter. The Bad Batch traveled alongside Rex to Braca in order to help remove their inhibitor chips. We saw them removed last episode, not without a small snag, I guess, but of course, that episode ended off with members of the Braca Scrapping Guild calling the Empire, which is what we saw this episode. And this episode was wild. The Empire deploys Crosshair and his squad to Braca, but the Kaminoans also deploy their own agent, none other than Cad Bane, the famous bounty hunter from the Clone Wars. Cad Bane has a duel with Hunter, not unlike a duel that was meant to happen between him and Boba Fett in the unfinished Clone Wars episodes, but in this case, he actually wins and runs off with a stunned Omega. But that's not what I want to talk about first of all. It was a great episode, but we'll get to that later. The thing that this episode really solidified is something that's been hinted at for a while now. That's one thing I've really liked with this show. It hasn't been afraid to drop hints very early on of where the overall plot is going. Now, sometimes these start off as very subtle before hitting you over the head with them, literally when it came to the case of Wrecker and his continual head trauma before his inhibitor chip activated, but other times this is something that you can see coming but is sort of ramping up in intensity. What I'm talking about is what I think will be one of, if not the most important and largest conflicts of the show, which will be the Kaminoans versus their new Imperial overlords. And this is something we saw hinted at as early as the first episode, where the Kaminoans directly intervene to keep the Bad Batch, and more importantly, I think Omega, out of the hands of the Empire. We now see too that the Empire is not only competing for the same overall goal, i.e. finding and killing in the Empire's case, or capturing in the Kaminoans' case, the Bad Batch, but the Empire is also now trying to directly exert control over Kamino, and this is what I think will probably lead to some sort of rebellion. We actually see this in just a brief moment as the episode is opening up, and a little bit of conversation that's not even really focused on but adds a lot of context. Admiral Rampart, who seems to be in control of the new developing Stormtrooper Corps, is meeting with the Prime Minister of Kamino, and he says specifically that from now on, he's to be apprised of all matters relating to Kamino. Now, I think apprised is probably a pretty weak way of putting it, because it's almost certain that the Empire does not only want to be aware of what's going on in Kamino, but if they haven't already, they will very soon be asserting control over the planet and all clone production, which is probably why we do see the increased pressure from Kamino to capture Omega, including the hiring of one of, if not the most expensive bounty hunters in the entire galaxy, Cad Bane. Cad Bane is kind of scary in Star Wars, and Star Wars The Clone Wars especially, because he's a bounty hunter who doesn't fail. Usually good guys in Star Wars beat the bad guys, but with Cad Bane, he's very, very difficult to defeat. He's competed with Jedi, and in this case, he easily outgunned Hunter. So again, why does Kamino want Omega at this point? We don't know. Clearly there's something special about her, whether she's force sensitive, whether she's a general improvement on the abilities and strength and whatever else of the other clones. It's hard to say. I'm sure we'll find out as the show progresses. Either way, they probably want her for a template, or for her genetic material, or because of something that they've learned from her that they can't use without her being present on the planet. The interesting thing though is also not only why they're doing this, but what this will lead to. I think it's pretty clear that at some point we're going to get the reason for why Star Wars canon has chose to drop clone troopers so quickly after the creation of the Empire. In Star Wars Legends, clones were used for a very long time, basically until they aged out of the program. In Star Wars canon, however, we know within the first year or two, the clones had been, well, who knows, and new human volunteers, conscripts, and whatever else were being used in the Stormtrooper Corps. Now, it's the fate of these clones that's also interesting. Unfortunately, I don't remember who it was that posted this, so I can't give credit. If someone lets me know in the comments, I'll include it in the description. option, but I saw a theory on Twitter that I quite liked. It may be that the Bad Batch tries to find a way to counter Order 66 or to counter the inhibitor chips, or maybe that the Kaminoans have some sort of built-in defense and the inhibitor chips will end up exploding or otherwise killing the rest of the active clones, or maybe just the inhibitor chips being active for so long kills the clones. Either way, there's literally a built-in mechanism for explaining why the clones are gone and where they went to. This would be incredibly dark, but I think it would be an interesting sort of finale to the whole clone experience that we've grown to learn about throughout the Clone Wars until now, one that certainly wasn't as fleshed out in Star Wars Legends before the Clone Wars. My only question is, will it be too dark? The other option is maybe the Kaminoans have a way to take direct control of the chips. Either way, I think it's pretty clear that they have major problems with this new Imperial fist that's been clamping down on them, and that they have something up their sleeve which they believe can turn the tide, so to speak. So that's my theory. But let's talk about the actual episode, because this was one of my favorites, and I'm thinking back to just a few weeks ago when people were complaining that all of these episodes were meaningless and the show was not going anywhere. That was never my point of view. I'm really glad those episodes exist. Just like in The Mandalorian, it's important not only for character development, but also just to give breathing room. If every moment is non-stop action, it makes the important action-filled moments less consequential. So I'm glad those episodes existed, but now that we're in the full action, well, I'm glad we are, because it's been really exciting. Seeing Crosshair return and fight with his whole squad was terrifying. They're beyond even trying to reason with him anymore, except with one exception, which was very interesting. Crosshair has been absolutely brutal. He's outthinking the rest of the Bad Batch because he knows his squad so well and is not limited by any sort of emotion. He's terrifyingly effective. He had them nearly killed, but for a very lucky escape. And I think the end of the episode was incredibly interesting because we see Crosshair basically get Anakin'd. He takes the full jet from that Venator's engines and just gets burnt really badly. If Crosshair's not killed during this season or during this series, he'll probably die of cancer in the next few years anyway. That cannot be healthy for you. Either way, that was a really brutal way to end that off, and the Bad Batch of course has escaped, but we don't even get a happy ending to this episode because now Omega is gone, and I assume that at this point the Bad Batch will probably be trying to hunt down Cad Bane. Maybe they'll go back to Fennec Shand, who will sort of act as a guide, because it seems like she could have taken a little bit of a liking to Omega, and she's going to be a main character in other shows, so it would make sense for them to give her a likable streak. All in all, this episode didn't waste any time. It was awesome. The action was great and it was intense. Pretty much everything positive I said about the visual aspects last time also applies today, so I'm not going to waste my time going back over that. If you want to watch that episode to see what I thought about the incredible visuals and animation here, you can do so. Overall though, amazing episode. I'm looking forward to this very interesting conflict that is being set up, and I will say the universe, or this show specifically, is a lot broader than I was worried. I like the Bad Batch, but I wasn't sure before the show started whether I would really enjoy something that focused just on them trying to survive. But so far Lucasfilm has, I think, done a good job of taking their smaller narrative and connecting it to the wider universe without it seeming like it's unreasonable. That's my thought though. Great episode. I look forward to reading your guys' comments. Let me know what you thought down below, what you think of the war theory that I have. Till next time though, guys, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.